Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters, and welcome to our review of Halloween 2, 1981.
Universal Pictures presents Halloween 2. More of the night he came home.
This is pretty exciting stuff. I have been enjoying kind of deep diving back into these movies as we inch closer to Halloween ends. I know this one's not technically canon anymore in the mainstream timeline, but I would be remiss by saying that I do think that's a shame because I love this movie.
I think this one's great. It really falls into form, which we'll get into. That slasher genre feels more like that kind of equation of a slasher than maybe even more so than the original. And this one, like I talk about Halloween 4 a lot because that is kind of one of my essential Halloween films. It was on TV a lot. I think this one was on TV. Yeah, me growing up, this one was on TV a lot more than the original was, just because I think it does have that different tone. It flows a little quicker. You're not kind of just waiting around for a lot of stuff to happen. This one really is on the move from the very beginning.
Yeah, I know this was a big one for my dad. Like I know that he really enjoyed Halloween too. So it was one that I definitely got to see right after I started getting into these movies. So Halloween 2 has always been held in high regard in my lifetime. It was always one that when it was on, I was excited to watch it. It wasn't until I got older that I kind of started to realize that there were people who were kind of detractors from this, who did not like it. And I was kind of surprised to see that because I think it's pretty non-offensive as far as what we get later in the series. I think that this kind of sticks with the tone, and it is, in my mind, the closest that we get to really sticking to that original 1978 film.
Yeah. And in this one, really, because I mean, this is a real fresh watch for me, knowing we were going to go into this. My gosh, talk about a film that just interweaves right after the original. I mean, because with the current ones with the 2018 and Kills, those ones take place, um, you know, uh, r- they go right into each other. And these two, I mean, this one feels the exact same as the original. They set the tone right, the camera work. It really feels like it just goes straight into Halloween 2.
Yeah, I think Rick Rosenthal. He did an excellent job really trying to emulate Carpenter. I know that he kind of wanted to do his own little flourishes here and there, but he still wanted to pay respect to that original film. And you really see it throughout this movie. I think he does an excellent job. Again, like you were just saying with the camera work in this movie, I think a lot of those long, steady shots, especially towards this opening, like when Michael goes to collect the knife and everything, and you're going into that house and all that, and then he goes and attacks the neighbor and everything like that. It all really still feels like that Carpenter style and tone. And I find it interesting when I watch this, because you just rewatched this before recording. I watched this as of recording about a week ago. So it's like the fact that there's so little music in those early points. It's all reliant on the sounds around you, and it does. You're right. Feel exactly like how it felt when you first watched it, and I think that that's part of the charm of this movie. I think that's why I like it so much, is that it is just another extension of that night. And you bring up 2018 and Halloween Kills, how they're also taking place on the same night. And I think that that does a serviceable job, but it's, I think more impressive in the fact that that's the same team, that's the same director. So it's kind of easy to fall back into this with them having a lot of people change behind the scenes on this. It is pretty like you got to give it some merit that they were able to pull it off as well as they did.
Yeah, and I mean this one's years later, so it's not like that they were kind of that was the plan. The original Halloween hit so big, and no one was really thinking that that was going to happen. That they had to come back for that sequel. So at that point, you're starting from scratch a lot of the time in terms of production workers and everything like that. So I mean, if you're coming in with a different crew, you have to try to emulate that. And I mean, Halloween at the time was huge, but no one, I don't think, ever knew what kind of influence on pop culture it was going to have that,
Mhm.
40 years later, we're still going to be seeing it around. So I don't even think they were certain of the gravity of the situation in terms of going into Halloween 2, and talk about a kind of culture shift in the 80s, where this one kind of kicked off the slasher genre. It's really credited a lot from a lot of people, where what the slasher genre became, it kind of flipped a little bit, even in those first few years of Friday 13th and everything, of kind of what we were going to get. And it's kind of trying to balance the original tone of Halloween with this kind of these new traits of the slasher genre, in terms of we have to up the body count, and kind of compete, and to kind of still stay true to your roots in a sense, because we do have, we've talked about the current ones, and it's like we still have voyeur Michael here. You know what I mean? Where we do have him a lot of times just kind of sitting and waiting, especially when he gets to the hospital. I find that stuff so intriguing. We're introducing so many different characters, and he's hiding in hospital room, or he's in the room with all the babies, looking at the nurses and stuff. I mean, there are so many great scenes in here, and it really does feel really true to the original, while also bringing something new, while competing with already informed slashers.
Yeah, and I do think it's kind of funny how, Halloween kind of busts on the scene, as we said in our last review for 78, not necessarily considered the first like modern day slasher. I think a lot of people nowadays throw that to Black Christmas,
Yeah.
but it was the first one to popularize it, to make it something that everybody was excited to see and wanted to go witness. And then it kind of fell to the wayside a little bit. They didn't jump on that second one right away. And so, they had Friday the 13th and other slashers kind of come up, and then they had sequels already out. And it's just one of those things where it's like, well, geez, Michael had to kind of play catch up. So when they originally made this movie, it was extremely faithful. But it was actually, from what I remember, doing my research into this, it was Carpenter himself who was afraid that with the lack of blood and the lack of, just kind of extra scares and kills that there were in this film in its initial cut, that it wasn't going to resonate with what audiences were expecting. So he had gone in and reshot a lot of this and added sequences with more gore and more violence, which, totally goes against everything from that first film. If you look at it, I mean, that first film is pretty bloodless in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. Like, there's only a couple of shots really where you see some of it. And then this one, it just, like, you watch them back to back, it is quite a ramp up. And
Yeah.
it's something I did not expect to see the first time I watched it.
Yeah, and it's like looking at the original Halloween. I think just from memory, you may think it's a little gorier than it actually is, just because of the subject matter. And then when you go in, you don't really see that much. And then kind of jumping to Halloween 2, where there is um, uh, pretty intense amount of gore, in terms of the kills and everything. They really do take advantage of it, more so than that original. So I think it's interesting, kind of that, again, the culture shift that we were going with, where you kind of have to compete, and where are you going to take this? And honestly, like, there are a lot of great kills in this, so it's like, I think it's kind of amping up the original and setting it on its own different tone. I mean, what we do get eventually after this is something completely different. But I think this one, especially in the later 80s of the other stuff, this one is almost, I don't know, it's the best of both worlds for me, I think, because you still get that remnant of the original Halloween story, while still getting some of the stuff that if you grew up in the late 80s, what you're used to in terms of the Halloween franchise. So it's like this one, I feel like it's in the embryonic stages of kind of what it's going to become. And I think this is kind of where it shines the most.
No, I agree. And I think that it is a nice balance. It is something where they knew that they had to make a change, but again, kind of already going into it with that reserved nature and mindset, they knew where to place it. I think
Yeah.
it doesn't get overly grotesque. Now, are there some things that I do think are a little funny and a little ridiculous when it comes to certain kills? Really, the big one for me, well, I guess the big two for me, that if we're going to get into this part of it, that kind of are like, okay, that's a little bit laughable, is the hot tub death,
Yeah.
only because I think it's a fine kill, but the fact that her face and head is burning and singeing, and Michael's dipping his hand in there, and there's nothing going on with it. And I ever since I first saw that, I always thought that was a little strange. But then, it is easily forgiven because again, it's like these are, they're relics of their time, so you kind of have to forgive some of that. And again, I think the overall quality of the film uh will kind of shepherd that through to where it's like if it sticks out to you, it's not going to ruin the movie for you.
Yeah.
The other one being, I don't remember the character's name, but it's the kid from The Last Starfighter. Um, he when he slips on the blood and knocks himself out, when it's kind of like assumed that he's dead, but he's kind of like incapacitated himself for the whole rest of the movie. It's
Yeah.
a little bit like, okay, like that seems a little cheap to me. As opposed to everything else that we're doing, because we get a lot of really creative and interesting kills throughout this movie, and I do appreciate that.
Yeah, and the one with the paramedic, I think, has kind of always bothered me a little bit. To know how long he was kind of out after he had slipped and fallen. I mean, depending on which cut you got, I do believe there's a cut where we don't see him again, and it's kind of believed that he blows up maybe in the hospital, and then there's one where he does come back out to his car and kind of collapses on the horn. And if I'm remembering that correctly, I think that's him, isn't it?
It is, yes, because then
Um,
that signals to Michael that somebody's
yes.
out there. So
So that one's kind of always bothered me just to how he just randomly slips. But I mean, like you said, it's a product of the time. It's a means to an end. I do find that really the how he ends up there is because Michael has put the I guess IV into the
the head nurse, yeah,
yes. I love the visual of all that blood all over. I mean,
the
it gets
dark
you asking.
room and everything, like how it's just like they're wholly just in their own little section and they're surrounded by blood.
And it kind of gets you asking those questions of exactly how that went down. I do like that that's off screen because you don't really know, and I think that amplifies the terror there of how he got her in that position, and then ended up, just bloodletting her basically.
Hmm.
So I think that's really interesting. Really, again, this like you said, where um, they know how to place the kind of gore that they have here, where it's not uh, all throughout the film, but the moments that they do have it, it becomes very meaningful. One of the ones that I've always enjoyed, and I think it shows really how effective audio can be, is when the police officer goes to check in the, I don't know if it's a basement or he's checking to see why the phones aren't working. And he realizes one of the doors is unlocked. And as he opens it and then closes it back up, Michael hits him with the end of the hammer, and just the audio sound of the hammer hitting, supposed to be his skull, that kind of metallic
Cling,
sound, it
yeah.
just is unsettling to me. It's so memorable. It's one of the things I think about when we talk about Halloween 2. It's always popped out in my head, and it's very modest in terms of what we get in a lot of this film, but just the noise alone is unsettling.
No, I agree, and I think like really we talk about the kills, I think, up front on this first because they are so much more bombastic than the last one. Because I mean, really, they aren't all that crazy if you compare it to things that we see today. Like, you
Yeah,
know, we just had Terrifier 2, our review go up on the channel, and that is extreme as far as blood, guts, and gore. Like that would have never flown in this time that this film had come out. But like the fact is that it is just so much more than the first film.
yeah,
And again, it's something that needs to be highlighted with the fact that they pulled that off, because I think that it is, you know, almost classy gore is kind of the best way to say it. It's like I feel like nothing is too extreme, but it's all just so unique and unsettling. And they use the space of him being in a hospital very well. Because, the first film was him just in a neighborhood with a butcher knife and, other household items. This one, you open it up where now he's got needles and, scalpels and other things. The IV drip was a great one that you brought up there. And the one that again really sticks out to me as making me feel uncomfortable is when the nurse gets the needle to the temple.
yes,
That ruins me because it's one of those things of growing up. I always thought that he injected her with something, but you really, when you grow up, you find out that it's just air, and he gives her an embolism. So it's just like her brain just like shuts down. And it's just like, holy fuck, like that has got to be an experience, like right there, to die that way.
Yeah.
And it's there's more thought put into that, in the horror of that, than you would get as you go along with this series. I mean, infamously, we both enjoy Halloween 4, but you get to the point where Michael is just shoving shotguns into people. So it's just kind of like, I think that they really did try their best to, stay creative with it. They realized that they had to catch up with kind of what they had created, but they didn't want to lose, the creative, playful nature that Michael has.
Yeah, and I think this is honestly where it is most evident. In the original, where we get, he's in the sheets with Bob's glasses. He sets up everyone with the headstone and kind of places them strategically. And then in the sequel here, we still get some of that where he's stringing up the police officer after he's killed them, just trying to terrify people. So we still get that kind of nature that Michael has before it's kind of, I don't think we really get that in the later ones that I can remember. But I do like that because it adds so much, I think, to him as a character. That's where I keep going back to this culture shift. And I think that's why looking from Halloween to Halloween 2 is so important here because, you can say, oh, it's not Terrifier grotesque, but there's a step up here. And I think, honestly, Halloween's probably, as I'm thinking about it, maybe the only franchise where we can see it as evident where, maybe Friday the 13th, I don't really think it's there. Nightmare on Elm Street came in the mid 80s, so we had already passed this culture shift where in the 70s, that Halloween is still very much a product of the 70s in terms of filmmaking. And then we get amped up and, it's a little more about the body count. So we're still in line with Halloween here, but we're amping up that body count. And it's kind of, okay, so we're really, really hearkening to some of the graphic gore here, but still kind of playing with some of the stuff that we had in the 70s. And it's like, that's why I find like these two films very intriguing companion pieces, because we can make that direct comparison, because this is very much, replicating. We talked about the original Halloween being blueprint horror. And it's like this is verbatim blueprint horror. We're actually using the original Halloween and replicating it for something in 1981. So I think that's what makes this such an interesting talking point. And in terms of these kills, because, looking at the original, we only get a handful of kills, and they're not really that graphic or anything. We do have that playful nature of, I guess you'd say playful. I don't know. It's very brutal in terms of Michael, jamming Bob up on the wall and then kind of doing his little head tilt. And, it is kind of fun, where it is kind of, maybe we can deem it playful Michael, where he knows what he's doing, in this brutal nature. And we still get that here in Halloween 2, where he's jamming a needle in the temple of a nurse, or jamming a needle in Dr. Mixter's eye and leaving him to be found. He turns him into the chair so that he can be turned around and we can unveil that. So there is this kind of weird, playful nature that Michael does keep, that I do think maybe he loses, especially in the late 80s, and it's not even there in the 90s. So this is a kind of dynamic that I do love in terms of Michael, because we've talked about it, and Halloween is my favorite franchise, and this is the kind of Michael that I enjoy most. Is, he's brutal, but then he also can get really psychological, and he just tries to terrify you from a mental perspective as well.
Yeah, and so kind of moving on from kills and stuff here, I do want to discuss the cast of this film. I mean, we obviously get back to really big heavy hitters from the last film with, Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis, and then, obviously Laurie Strode with Jamie Lee Curtis. So it's one of those things where it's like, I think that there's two minds in this, where it's like, everybody kind of views Jamie Lee Curtis, Laurie Strode, as, kind of a waste in this film, because she's so sedated and she's so out of it through most of it. A lot of people like to poke fun at the wig. The wig has never really bothered me. It's honestly something that, until it was pointed out to me, I never really even noticed. But I think that's just because the atmosphere is so perfectly captured from that first film. But I mean, Lord, this, if it wasn't cemented in the first one, if you didn't already love Donald Pleasance's Dr. Loomis, this really does, I think, cement that relationship just with how, you get that little bit of the expanded lore with this movie. You get to understand a little bit more about, like, you know, they try their best to kind of give a little bit more into why Michael's doing what he's doing without giving you, all the cards. And he is our conduit for that. Like, he's the one that goes to the school and then talks about Sam Hain, which we obviously know as Sawin, all that stuff. And it's just one of those things where it's like, he is really the heart and soul of this franchise going forward. I know Laurie and Jamie Lee Curtis, she's the final girl, she's the face and everything, but goddamn, dude, like, these movies would be nothing without Donald Pleasance.
And I think that's a testament to, and we'll probably talk about it, but where John Carpenter says, he had an immense writer's block here, and
Mm-hmm.
had a 6-pack of beer in order to get through the script. And I mean, who knows how accurate that is, actually going back and reliving it. But looking at this one, this really set that trajectory for Donald Pleasance, where he is a player in the original, but it is very much Laurie's story. And going into this one, we almost flip it in terms of, Laurie's in the hospital for the majority of this film. Yes, we have that final encounter at the end, but we're really spending a lot of time with Dr. Loomis here, going through trying to find Michael and figure all this out, because the search continues for him after, he
Yeah.
shot him and he got up. So
Everybody
Laurie's,
doubts him too, and I love that, where everybody's like, "You missed. There's no way you
yep.
shot this guy 6 times and he just got up."
And that's a great dynamic for him, where it's like, he is a doctor, but a lot of people think this guy's a loony, as well, where, at first no one believes that he's pure evil and that he's going to be able to do these things. And then once he does, it's like, oh, you didn't kill him. It's like, you didn't shoot him that many times. And so he's always battling this. No one believes anything that he's saying. And I mean, he's the smartest person in the room a lot of the time. So it's like, I do love this kind of dynamic that we have where we flip it, and Laurie's out of the game for the most part, and we're living through Dr. Loomis, and he's trying to actually catch Michael this time. He's not running from him. So we do have this change of dynamic. And again, I keep using Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills as a reference point, where Laurie's taken out of the game in that one a lot. And maybe the characters there don't resonate because they didn't really establish them in 2018. So we don't really care that much. We don't have that connection with them, other than maybe what we're hoping that we have that connection from 1978's Halloween. But I don't think it's there. Whereas in this one, I think maybe this is why I love Halloween 2, where we do carry those characters from the original into here and give, we see Sheriff Brackett back, only
Mhm.
for a shorter period of time.
But
But
he
I
has a
do like
very
it.
effective scene. I
Yes.
mean, like, he has one of the best scenes in this film, like the discovery of the kids across the street.
And to have him back again, I think this helps make it feel a lot like this is the same night that Halloween 1978 took place. So I mean, I love seeing these characters back. Dr. Loomis is such a big selling point in this. His performance is great, and it's very intriguing that you can make a case between two different characters that share the same space and time, that you can be like, well, no, they're the major player of the franchise, but no, the other one can be the major player of the franchise. And
Mm.
I think that's great script writing.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you have other people, like Nurse Marion gets to come in, and she gets a little bit more time so we can develop her. She kind of gets to shepherd along the real big twist, which I'll save for a little bit and later into this conversation, because I know that's a point of contention for fans. But it is one of those things where it's like, I think that having her back and really giving her more to do was great. And I mean, some would argue that it's not much for these characters, but the fact that they really, again, paid respect and took the time to really try to make a good sequel to Halloween. It is something that I feel like as we continue on, we lose a lot of that. Some people would say 4. I appreciate 4 more every time I watch it. I think that there was really genuine attempts there, and I think it works out. But then, like, as you get into like 5 and 6, and then the remakes and everything, it's just like they stray so far away from what that first film really was. And it's just like, this to me is kind of that lightning in a bottle of like, okay, they actually pulled it off as best as you can without having Carpenter directly behind the camera. I know that there's rumors. There's a lot of people that say, especially, I believe on the Slaughtered Lamb podcast, they were talking about this, that it's hinted pretty heavily, and I believe taking shape. Don't quote me on it. I haven't read the book yet. That John Carpenter kind of ghost directed a lot of this movie, which wouldn't surprise me considering Rick Rosenthal comes back to do Resurrection, and that's all him, and that's a rough fucking movie, man.
Yeah.
But again, I just think that he was a young, hungry filmmaker at this point who loved the first film and wanted to do this. And what's amazing, if we're going to kind of talk about the potential of what almost was that the director of Halloween 3, I literally just had his name in my head, now it's gone.
Tommy Lee Wallace.
Tommy Lee Wallace, yes, was given this movie. The Carpenter said, "I want you to make this." He read the script and said, "No, I'm good on that. I don't want to do that one." So it wasn't until Halloween 3 came along and they needed an idea and they needed somebody to do it that they came back to him again. And that's how that came along. And was an underappreciated gem at the time. But it's just one of those things where it's just kind of like, it's kind of amazing behind the scenes that this kind of didn't really at times seem like it had an amazing like production. It definitely seemed like it was plagued with some issues, but for the product to come out as well as it did is kind of incredible.
Yeah. And we're looking at you're talking about Halloween 4, and for me, I love Halloween 4. Obviously, I've mentioned it a handful of times, but it's like, even I agree that going from Halloween 2 to Halloween 4, I do think that it's different leagues in terms of filmmaking, where Halloween 2 seems like they wanted a continuation of some sort of story, whereas 4 was just kind of, what do we do now to get Michael back on screen and kind of play with how big the slasher genre had become. Even if it is closer toward the tail end of it, they still wanted Michael back. And it really kind of feels like that, where you establish some characters and then you don't really know where to go with it other than the kills. Whereas this one, they were intrigued to tell some sort of story. Whether it works or not is kind of up to the viewer. Like you said, there was a pretty big discourse in terms of whether you like the arc that they put in here or not. But it feels like there was a reason for this film. And I know they wanted to bring Michael back to kind of see what kind of money they could get from this, some sort of return. But it really does feel like they tried to progress the story as naturally as possible, rather than just throwing Michael in a different situation and having him slash people up. They wanted to give him a motivation here, and that reason.
And that really sets him apart from those other franchises. As I say it all the time, I'm a huge Jason fan, but really you get to a point where those movies we're just throwing new kids who are just the same archetypes back in the cabin, back at a different cabin, a different campground next to Camp Crystal Lake, whatever it is, we're just throwing them in there and letting Jason go to town on them. And for this to really make an honest attempt, I think that it is admirable and is why I hold this film at such high regard. It is, to me, the second best Halloween film in this franchise. I mean, I'll come right out and say that. I know we kind of save that stuff for the end, but if it's not clear enough already, this is my number 2, and it's stayed my number 2, and it probably will. I have a hard time believing that Halloween Ends is going to surpass this. There's always that chance, but I mean, like, this to me is, I watch Halloween 1, I'm going to throw on Halloween 2.
Yeah. And even going into this, I mean, the pacing for me is just, they know how to do it, where I love that, looking at the original one, Laurie goes, from the original characters, Laurie goes to the hospital. So it's like, for me, that was the most natural thing to do. What is that character going to do? She was a high school student that was attacked by a man in a mask. What's going to happen to her? She's obviously going to go in the hospital. She's not going to, grab a gun and go hunting him down like Dr. Loomis does. So I think that made the most sense. And then we kind of start opening up the world. And we've talked about it on several different things where I feel like in the new incarnations they didn't really take advantage of Haddonfield at all, and where this one that's absolutely what they do. Where Laurie goes off to the hospital, and we start opening up what else is going on Halloween night. You have the old couple watching the news, making sandwiches. The nurse going into the hospital. After the parties, you have people just walking around. The man with the boombox. There's a character that makes fun of the way Michael walks. It's like all this small stuff that makes Haddonfield feel alive. And I think that's the big charm of Halloween 2, because we spend a lot of time opening up different relationships, being introduced to different characters that all feel real. And then by that third act, that's where we strip it down and we get back to the Michael versus Laurie with a little bit of interplay with Dr. Loomis. And I think it all works. I think that's why Halloween 2, like you, is my definitive sequel to the original Halloween. It just works on so many levels. It feels like there is still that level of filmmaking that we were used to in the original. I know this one, some people don't like it compared to the original, but I think this is the Jaws effect, where this one suffers because of the success of the original.
And you talk about bringing in the world and everything of Haddonfield too, or of Haddonfield. I said Haddonfield too. But it's one of those things where it's like they even reference people who just got a little name drop, like Ben Tramer is tragically killed in this film. And it's so iconic, and it's such an important thing that even like NECA, because I have to pin this up because I'm so proud of it. They release a mask with your Halloween 2 figure, so you can literally have Ben Tramer. The flames are from a different pack, also referencing Halloween 2, but I figured, I'm going to display Michael with another iconic thing that they kind of bring into this film is the blood eyes, where he gets shot in the face. And I think that look for Michael is one of my all-time favorites. I love the blood tears coming down. And if I was to, I posted a little short on the channel a month or so ago when I got my Friday the 13th tattoo. I am planning on getting a Halloween tattoo with Michael Myers and everything probably next year. And that is going to be the Blood Eyes variant. Like, I've already settled that I like that aesthetic. I think that looks wonderful. And it is one of my favorites, pieces of alterations to the mask. It's one of the few alterations I can say that I think actually sticks and works in it and is timeless.
Yeah. And I like the way Michael's portrayed in this. You go back to the blood tears. I don't know how that exactly works in terms of getting shot in the eyes and still, moving around, but I absolutely love that scene where we're playing it. He gets shot and he's got the little scalpel. And again, going back to the audio here, when he is swinging that scalpel, just wildly trying to listen to where everyone's coming from, and you just hear it hitting the air, I think, again, is so smart. It builds so much tension because, Laurie's just sitting there trying to hide from Michael, just right in that corner, trying to create space where she's back against the wall, and he's just swinging wildly with that scalpel. I think that really builds tension, and you're not really doing that much. It's just him swinging back and forth. And then as Donald Pleasance, Dr. Loomis, goes over and starts turning on like the gas canisters or whatever, it's just like that hiss there. I think they really take advantage of the audio here, which sometimes that stuff is underrated, where we're harkening so much on the how important the visuals are, but adding that audio stuff here, there's a lot of great audio pieces.
Absolutely. So to kind of get us into our last segment here for this review / discussion, I want to talk about the twist. This is highly debated amongst folks. Now, this was something for me, not growing up with this film, like being fresh and new. This twist had been spoiled for me long before I had even seen this film, where it's basically that it is revealed Carpenter created it through that 6-pack of beer with massive writer's block, that the reason that Michael is chasing after Laurie isn't just because she got away, but it is because that is Michael's little sister. And I know for some people, that is how it is. That is how it will always be. regardless of what any franchise says or how they do it. They cut that out with the new ones where they are just, victim and, abuser in a way. But it's just one of those things where it's like, to me, I have never had an issue with this twist. I always think that it's fun. It does it lack logic? Sure. Because we never see Lori as a little tiny baby. And she doesn't have the same parents as Michael. She's adopted, I guess, is the way that they're kind of swinging it. So it's like there's a few logical leaps that have to be made there. But I mean, it is one of those things where it's like it was always instilled. It was always in Halloween's DNA to me. Being someone who grew up with the franchise already well into all of these installments. But I've always enjoyed it. I can take it or leave it, though. It is one of those things where it's like with the new films, I don't mind that they take that away.
Yeah.
Because that's the beauty, again, of this franchise and other franchises that do this is like these movies still exist. We could still sit here and say, oh, we have Halloween 1 and 2. So the twist is there. Like, that's my definitive Halloween. Or we have Halloween 1, 2, and H2O. And, you can say that that's a trilogy right there. Or you can just take the first one and the new ones, or just the first one in general. It doesn't matter. It's just kind of however you want to interpret it, And I like that. So it's like the twist for me has never bothered me.
Yeah, and like I wasn't a moviegoer in 1978, walking out of theater, and then going back in 1981 and realizing that they decided to make Laurie Strode Michael Myers' sister. So going in and watching these, I was always under the impression, that they're related. That's just how it is. That's part of the story, and that was always in my head while watching these films. So it wasn't anything like a dynamic that I had to wrestle with at all. It was just kind of there, as that's how the story goes. So I don't have any problem with it. I understand why people could. I mean, it's very convenient in terms of just passing by and finding your sister as soon as you get to Haddonfield, which I understand is kind of maybe could be weak storytelling. But for me, it doesn't really bother the film at all. I don't think this really kind of goes off the rails until they really double down on it in Halloween 4, where it's like now he's killing like every family member that he's ever
Yeah,
had.
the bloodline
Where
thing starts to kick in.
it's like at least this one is okay, it's his other sister, so it makes sense that he would want to kill that sister after killing his older sister. So there's a level of logic there, I think, to an extent. So it doesn't really hurt it. Gives Michael a motivation, and it's something I grew up with. So this isn't something that bothers me like it would probably bother someone who had experienced this film when it initially came out, and the idea was, oh, it's just some guy that kind of fixated on this girl who was walking home. So for me, it's nothing that bothers me. They took it out in the new ones, like you said, and that doesn't bother me either. But I don't think this is a knock on the storytelling. It's more so on like 4 and what they decided to do after that, where they started to really double down on that family angle and have him kill anyone that's been attached to him. Because I would say that original where he just fixates on someone kind of really does open the world up wide to be like, well, he can do pretty much anything that he wants. But I don't think it hurts it as much as people say. So, I'm fine with it. No big deal to me.
I agree. But alrighty, guys, I think that's going to kind of bring us to the end here. Luke, do you have any closing thoughts or statements on Halloween 2 here?
Like I said, I think this is a pretty good film. I think there's a lot of great visuals in here. Obviously, we have the background there of him burning. I think that's a lot of fun. So, I give this one a watch. This is my definitive sequel. So if you haven't seen this one, I say sit down and take a look.
Absolutely. And of course, with this review, we are going to be covering this at some point down the road on Splattercast, giving this a nice deep dive where we can kind of go into more of those behind the scenes trials and tribulations, thoughts, theories, everything going on there. This was more or less just, again, this kind of little series we're doing for Splatterthon, where we're kind of discussing each of these films leading into ends. And, it's an exciting time. It's fun to do. I always love like watching these. I'm going to be watching them regardless because the new film is on its way to us. So it's like just to get to sit down and talk about them a little bit this year was definitely satisfying to do. But yeah, guys, that's going to basically wrap us up here for Halloween 2. Like I said, we are in the midst of Splatterthon. So if you haven't heard yet, we are doing a giveaway on the 31st during a live stream where we're going to be giving away a copy of the Black Phone on Blu-ray, as well as a Splatterthon mug. So definitely click that link down below to enter. It's real simple, and all you got to do is leave a comment of your favorite horror film. And yeah, we'll be able to get you in there, and hopefully you'll be the one to walk away with those prizes. Other than that, you can follow us on our social media at Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at SplattercastPod. And yeah, keep an eye out on the channel, man. We got a lot of great content coming to you. We just had a couple of really good reviews this weekend. We got Sunday Scaries coming out tomorrow morning. Lots of good stories in there. And yeah, I mean, we're going to be keeping it here for all your Halloween Ends coverage next weekend. It's going to be a big weekend. This was a big weekend for us. So it's like, it's going to get crazy. It's going to get wild. So get ready for all that.
I'm excited.
Absolutely. But I guess until next time, I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, stay scared.